So, yeah. So today we're going to talk about hydrogenation, and this is something which you would have already studied in your master's program, or you might have encountered it in different class. Uh, this is a classic reaction because you uh, you really don't think that you need a catalyst. And why do I say that? The thermodynamics of the reaction are such that it is favorable, but still the reaction does not work unless you have a catalyst. And of course, all of us know that there is a huge energy evacuation even if you have a thermodynamically favorable reaction. This energy evacuation is responsible for slowing down reactions. And the question is, uh, how do these catalysts work? Basically, if you look at the way in which catalyst is helping the reaction is by changing the energy evacuation, but more than that, it is uh, it is changing the reaction, but it's also changing it into multiple steps, and each one of these steps has got a small energy evacuation, and this results in uh, a significant enhancement in the rate of the reaction apart from the entropic factor. So there is a change in energy evacuation and in the delta S of activation. Both of them are changed during this process of catalysis. Something that you need to keep in mind when you look at the reactions. Reactions like butadiene plus ethylene, there is also another factor which is in place, and that is if you take a reaction like butadiene and ethylene, we know from Woodard-Hoffmann rules that these are reactions which are orbital controlled, or we say it's orbital control because all other uh, factors are favoring the reaction, but the nature of the two orbitals that are interacting play a crucial role, so much so that you cannot combine a 2 plus 2 2 pi plus 2 pi cycloaddition, but you can do a 4 pi plus 2 pi cycloaddition. So we say that although the change is only formation of two carbon-carbon bonds, in both cases, this reaction is orbital controlled more than anything else. So if you look at hydrogenation, surprisingly, even in hydrogenation, there seems to be an orbital control. And what we need to do in a reaction very often is to form a new bond, and for that you need to break the, usually it is the HOMO, and form a new bond by populating the LUMO. And you find here that I have for you ethylene and dihydrogen, and we have the HOMO of dihydrogen at minus 16.29 eV. And if this has to pump an electron density into the LUMO, and similarly from the HOMO of the ethylene, you can push electron density into the LUMO of dihydrogen. But then both of them are symmetry wise, they do not overlap. Symmetry is not matched. So that is the reason why you cannot have a direct reaction between the two species. And that's one way in which so if a species is very highly polar, then the reaction could be charge controlled. So there can be charge control, there can be orbital control and there can be entropy control for reactions to function or not function. So these are factors which you have to keep in mind, and catalysis basically overcomes some or many of these limitations. So if you talk about dihydrogenation, activation is essential. If there is no catalyst, there is no reaction. And in general, there is no, I should say this with the caveat that it is still date. We do not have good organic catalysts for carrying out the same reaction, facilitating dihydrogen activation and hydrogenation. But this is only till date. But the same reaction is done in a very facile fashion by metal complexes. And we will see today there are a couple of different ways by which dihydrogen is activated. So let's take a look at the three simple ways to activate dihydrogen. I will tell you those three ways ahead of time, and then we will look at them one by one. One is to do oxidative addition of dihydrogen, H2. This is actually hydrogen, I mean H2, to give dihydrate. The second one is to do a homolytic cleavage of the hydrogen-hydrogen sigma bond by a metal-metal sigma bond. Now, this is, you might wonder, MM sigma bond and HH sigma bond will have the same symmetry. So how come they are not orbital controlled? The fact is, the orbitals are still not symmetry matched, but in terms of energy, the energy required to span the gap between the MM sigma bond and the sigma star bond is very small. So MM bonds are weak. So if you have a weak bond, then that means the sigma to sigma star energy gap is small. And if that gap is small, you can break that bond fairly easily. And the same way you can circumvent this problem of symmetry mismatching. So the third one is a ligand or a base assisted heterolytic cleavage. So in these two cases, you have both hydrogens being available as H as two hydrogens or H dot. Here you have a heterolytic splitting, so dihydrogen splits as H plus and H minus notionally. So as I told you, in oxidation state, in the case of oxidation states also, you know that this is really not indicative of the charge on the species. So ligand and base assisted heterolytic cleavage, or the HH bond, leads to formally H plus and H minus being available for the reaction. So before we proceed further, let's just recap what happens when you have in a metal complex. You very often have interaction of dihydrogen molecule as such to the vacant coordination site of a metal. Oxidative addition or breaking of the HH bond and formation of WH bonds sometimes is extremely facile, and some of these reactions are actually in equilibrium. So they're not, they are energetically close by, and so you might have an energy of activation, but then it is circumventable and they are reasonably close in energy level. How is this important? This is important because what it is telling you is that splitting of the H-H bond is possible with these metal complexes, which are very often in low oxidation states. Cleavage of a MM bond, a classic example is Mn2CO10. It requires high pressure of dihydrogen, but nevertheless you can split a manganese-manganese bond using H2 itself. No other intervention or catalyst is required. You can generate HMnCO5. The same thing is true with CO2-CO8. We saw that yesterday. And here is another case where a rhodium complex, and the only difference between CO2-CO8 and this complex is that you have rhodium instead of cobalt, and instead of carbon monoxide you have PPH3. So these are complexes which are activated hydrogen, which can now react with other species. Finally, heterolytic cleavage is something that happens when you heterolytic cleavage happens when you have a base or a ligand. So these are already polarized bonds. These bonds are already polarized. So oxygen is much more electronegative than a metal. So you already have delta minus and delta plus. So that being the case, it's not very surprising that you have PDH and OH polarized as delta minus, so that's, and delta plus. Okay, so that's why I'm calling this a heterolytic cleavage. And there are, of course, other cases where it's very obvious, clear separation of charge takes place and you have H plus and H minus. Okay. Hydrogenations that depend on dihydride formation, I will consider that first because that's the Wilkinson's catalyst, example of Wilkinson's catalyst. Most of you know this catalytic cycle, so let's go through this fast. The most important thing is there is a loss of ligand. So for example, you cannot replace this phosphine with any phosphine. You make it PET3, then the reaction will not work because the phosphorus rhodium bond becomes extremely stable, so stable that the equilibrium between the catalytically active species RHPET3 is not going to be that's not going to be possible. So activation of dihydrogen does not take place. Okay. Whereas in this case, when you have PPH3, loss of PPH3 is facile, even though it's small, but then it is facile and it is in equilibrium with the species with an empty bond, and it activates dihydrogen. So much so that you can, the moment you add dihydrogen, you will see a change in the oxidation state and the color changes for this complex. And once you have this oxidative addition taking place, you now have a vacant coordination site. You now have a vacant coordination site because rhodium is now in rhodium plus 3, and you have a sixth vacant site which is occupied by ethylene. Now you can have the hydrogen and the ethylene in cis positions, and this of course can lead to migratory insertion. So I should write it here. Migratory insertion happens here, and then you have ethyl hydride complex on the rhodium. This is of course set up to do reductive elimination, and so the rhodium, which is +3 here, comes back to rhodium, which is +1, and then oxidative addition gives you back the catalytically active species ready for another hydrogenation reaction. So Wilkinson's hydrogenation catalyst was in fact a breakthrough, because until then it was the domain of heterogeneous catalysis. Most of the catalysts known in the literature were heterogeneous catalysts, and they were brute force catalysts. Many times they were not very active. I will tell you a few examples where there was mild laboratory scale reactions that could be carried out, but bulk reactions were carried out with palladium and carbon and things like that, which required high pressure of hydrogens. Now, right after this Wilkinson's discovery, Schrock and Osborn studied a rhodium cationic complex. This cationic complex with cyclooctadiene, this is cyclooctadiene, turns out to be a very good catalyst, much more active than the Wilkinson's catalyst. So this catalyst was more active, and the reason that is given for this increased activity is the fact that this is the starting complex. This is what you add into solution, but the moment you have dihydrogen, you end up hydrogenating the catalyst itself. Catalyst is hydrogenated, and which means that the cyclooctadiene COD is now converted to cyclooctane, and it is no longer a ligand. The solvent which is present in the medium is the ligand. Sometimes it could be astronitrile or THF, which could be a suitable solvent for coordinating to the rhodium, and that is the active species which is going to enter the catalytic cycle. Now, in this case, one has written it in such a way that the solvent is replaced by ethylene, and the reaction of the oxidative addition step is a second slower step. But you can see very easily right here that the addition of dihydrogen and the addition of the ethylene could have easily been reversed, and it is usually a stoichiometric reaction or a reaction in the absence of one of these substrates that tells you the rate of such reactions. And it is shown that the Schrock-Osborn catalyst has a very high rate for reaction with ethylene and alkenes. And this is attributed to the fact that this has now got a positive charge, and the positive charge promotes the electron donation from the ethylene. So that is a better reaction, or rather it is a more favored reaction than the oxidative addition of H2. So in the Schrock-Osborn catalytic cycle, the olefin coordination precedes the dihydrogen activation and dihydrogen interaction. So in the previous example, of course, we had Wilkinson's catalyst, which had a chloride which was stuck to the rhodium, and the positive charge not being there, the interaction of ethylene to the rhodium was weaker, and dihydrogen activation of the catalyst was more facile. So that was happening at ambient conditions. So this is a major difference between the Schrock-Osborn catalyst and the Wilkinson's catalyst, and this is manifested in the reactivity of the species. You will notice that you cannot, I mean, at the end of the reaction cycle, at the end of the first reaction cycle, you would have hydrogenated cyclooctadiene, and so you will not have the catalyst in a recoverable form at the end of the first cycle. But very little catalyst is required in all these cases, so it's not a big loss. Nevertheless, rhodium is more expensive, so it's not trivial to lose rhodium. Usually one collects it back and recycles it. Okay, so here, because the hydrogenation, the olefin coordination is a key step, and also it is a sensitive step, meaning the stability of the metal olefin bond turns out to be a key factor. If you cannot form a stable olefin complex, then the hydrogenation will not proceed. Surprisingly, I would have imagined it to be equally important in heterogeneous catalysis, but surprisingly, heterogeneous catalysis, it's not so crucial. And I think that is because of the fact that heterogeneous catalysts have got kinks, where the metal atom is in fact exposed to the corner of a step in the catalyst. And so the catalyst is now fairly exposed, and steric effects do not seem to be that important. So hydrogenation with RHCl PPH3 thrice is sensitive to steric effects, and you generally have only cis addition of the hydrogen. That is demonstrated by this addition of D2 to this molecule of malic acid, and you have cis addition, and I just mentioned to you about the rate difference between sterically hindered and sterically unhindered forms, and this can be used to advantage if you want to hydrogenate a non-hindered double bond. If you want to hydrogenate a hindered double bond, then you cannot use the Wilkinson's catalyst. So the least hindered olefin approaches from the less hindered phase, the metal atom, and gets hydrogenated. And so here you have two double bonds. One is in fact conjugated. Usually conjugated double bonds get hydrogenated more easily, but here the unhindered double bond has got hydrogenated. Okay, so that's the emphasis on this. Of course, you can compare them with heterogeneous catalysts. So this is the homogeneous catalyst, and this is the heterogeneous catalyst. And you can see that the heterogeneous catalyst is hydrogenating the hindered double bond, whereas the homogeneous catalyst is hydrogenating the less hindered form. Okay, less hindered double bond. I have a feeling that it will hydrogenate both. In this slide, I have written it as if this is not hydrogenated. I'll have to check up on this. But the fact is, the heterogeneous catalyst is capable of hydrogenating the more hindered double bond. So, so this is something that can be used to advantage. But nevertheless, before we proceed further, I will just summarize by saying that your Wilkinson's catalyst is a remarkable catalyst. It has a fairly straightforward, no difficulties associated with the reaction cycle, and it hydrogenates several olefins fairly easily using the simple steps that I have mentioned here. But you can see that there is a remarkable similarity in all the catalytic steps. Loss of ligand, oxidative addition or substitution of the ligand, and then oxidative addition, migratory insertion, and then reductive elimination. So this is true when the metal undergoes an oxidation, when you have an oxidative addition of the dihydrogen. The other type of metal catalysts are those which are called monohydrate catalysts. These are called dihydrate catalysts, what we just discussed, but what we are going to discuss is a monohydrate catalyst. And these monohydrate catalysts are, there are many of them, and surprisingly, this also has the same steric restrictions. It hydrogenates only terminal olefins, etc. There is some chemoselectivity which is exhibited by all these catalysts. There are substrates which are reduced by heterogeneous catalysts, including, for example, nitro groups, cyano groups. They are all reduced very efficiently with heterogeneous catalysts. So heterogeneous catalysis is a little less discriminatory. Homogeneous catalysts can be more selective in hydrogenating the double. So that's why the value of this reaction becomes goes up because of the way in which they are chemoselective as well as sterically sensitive. So let me come back to the reaction which is the monohydrate catalyst. Monohydrate catalysts, even in the dihydrate catalyst, we discussed two types, Schrock-Osborn and Wilkinson catalyst. Here we have a monohydrate. The monohydrate simply has loss of ligand. Notice in this whole projection, I have shown you P as PPH3. Please note that this is not phosphorus, this is triphenylphosphine. And the triphenylphosphine loss is resulting in a vacant coordination sphere where you can have coordination of an olefin. Now you have no oxidation state change, you have a hydrogen migration. That of course gives you an alkyl complex. Now when you reacted with dihydrogen, you have an oxidation state change. So here you have an oxidative addition, and subsequently you have regeneration of the catalytically active site. Now, Elias's book suggests that ruthenium is less likely to undergo oxidative addition, and so it would undergo hydrogenolysis. So this is not the favored step, but you will have hydrogenolysis by a short circuit right here with the two hydrogen atoms interacting with ruthenium and with a carbon. So this will be a sigma bond metathesis and formation of the catalytically active site. I should say that this is a much more sensible way. There is no oxidation state change. And also, if you look at ruthenium, the ruthenium doesn't have to go to +4 oxidation state. There are complexes which are ruthenium in +4 oxidation states, but then the ligands that are present on this metal is not suitable for high oxidation state. So this is a much more sensible mechanism. You can have sigma bond metathesis and formation of the starting material. If you go through this catalytic cycle, then let me give you the this catalytic cycle. the green one, and let's make this the blue cycle. So the blue cycle, if is a high oxidation state mechanism, let's call this the low oxidation state mechanism. The low oxidation state mechanism is preferred for ruthenium. Now, if you have a diene, what will happen? Will it hydrogenate it in a 1,2 fashion, or will it do it in a 1,4 fashion, or will it hydrogenate both double bonds? There are some complexes like the CP2CO MOH2 complex, which seems to do dienes to monoenes. Okay, so but is this 1,4 addition or 1,2 addition? This is not answered by this slide right here, but let me just show you a few more surprises with this catalyst. Cyclooctadiene has no reaction. There are some exceptions, but interestingly, this catalyst carries out 1,4 cyclo addition, 1,4 dihydrogen addition very selectively. Okay, and this is at higher pressure too. So this is a very surprising reaction indeed. So let me now come to another case, which is this is a case where you have lutetium. Lutetium is, of course, lutetium is actinide or allanthonide. Actinide. So I'm not able to see the periodic table from where I'm sitting, but this is not a transition metal. So the +3 oxidation state for this lutetium is fairly, you cannot undergo oxidative addition. So how is this molecule capable of carrying out hydrogenation, and that too at a phenomenal rate? The turnover frequency for this molecule, for this catalyst, is 120,000 per hour. That means, let's make it, so that will work out to be 2,000, oops, that will be 2,000 per minute. And even if I make it 1,800 per minute, that will be 300 per second. So that's a super fast rate at which this molecule is carrying out catalysis, almost like enzymes. And how is it doing it? So here is the proposed catalytic cycle. I will put blobs for the pentamethyl cyclopentadiene species. So this is an intermediate which can be formed in equilibrium that can interact with an olefin. Now I'm going to approximate it further. So that's the hydrogen and the ethylene. Now you can have a migratory insertion to produce an alkyl group. So if I do a sigma bond metathesis with dihydrogen here, I will get the catalytically active species, the lutetium, in a single step. So this is a case where you cannot have oxidative addition. So hydrogen bond sigma bond metathesis, hydrogen sigma bond metathesis is the easiest way you can explain the reaction, and that it is very fast is indeed quite surprising. It's super fast diffusion, probably just diffusion controlled reaction. The moment it sees an alkene, it hydrogenates it to the alkyl species, which immediately reacts with dihydrogen to give you the monohydride species. So this is again a monohydride, but the monohydride which does not have the opportunity to undergo oxidative addition, and hydrogenolysis is extremely fast. Professor Elias also observes that these hydrogenation catalysts were very important when vegetable oils were converted to saturated storable forms of the oil. But after the health benefits of mono unsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats were shown, these are not being used for hydrogenation of oils, vegetable oils, but they are used for hydrogenation of pharmaceuticals. Now, even there, the pharmaceutical, you have to do it extremely carefully. You have to do it without isomerization. If you have noticed carefully, the formation of an alkyl complex in all these reactions, the metal alkyl bond is formed. The moment a metal alkyl bond is formed, beta hydrogen elimination is exactly the reverse of what we have done. We have added a hydrogen to the beta position. So we can abstract it. So if we can remove that beta hydrogen, then the reaction can be reversed. If there are two options for removing the beta hydrogen, then you will have the possibility for isomerization. So isomerization is often a complication that is observed in all these reactions. Unwanted isomerizations can happen because of two different possibilities. One is when you have the possibility for beta hydride elimination, the formation of a allylic complex, allyl hydride, and then re-addition of the hydrogen. This doesn't have to be a stable entity. This can be up on the hill, and the two olefin complexes can be here, olefin, and this can be the allyl hydride complex. But then if this energy of activation is comparable to the energy that you are providing the hydrogenation step, then the olefin hydrogenation, olefin isomerization will be a competing process for the olefin hydrogenation. Isomerization and hydrogenation will compete. This is a complication that we have to avoid. If you remember, I told you that there are two ways by which hydrogenation, isomerization can happen, and these two ways are addition, elimination, and allyl group formation. So the addition elimination reaction is again the intermediate is an alkyl complex, and this is what I have been saying in the hydrogenation. This alkyl complex is what you have as one of the intermediates in the hydrogenation process. Hydrogenation process always involves a alkyl complex. So this can now do beta hydrogen elimination in two different ways. In this particular slide, I have put it as red hydrogen and blue hydrogen, any one of these hydrogens, and you can see that isomerization can take place. So in summary, hydrogenations are easily catalyzed by metal complexes, and these hydrogenations are again carried out by the metal in multiple ways. We have not looked at the ligand assisted pathway yet. We have looked at monohydrogen catalyst and dihydrogen catalyst, and the monohydrogen catalyst has the advantage of going through a sigma bond metathesis, so that the reaction doesn't have to go through an oxidation state change at all. Both lutetium and ruthenium examples that I showed you do not have an oxidation state change if you undergo sigma bond metathesis. So you do not even, technically you do not even need a transition metal in order to carry out these hydrogenation reactions. Main group elements can also do it by sigma bond metathesis. So the Wilkinson's catalyst and the Schrock-Osborn catalyst, on the other hand, they undergo oxidative addition fairly easily. And that is the reason why they're able to activate dihydrogen. Now I'm going to tell you how, just briefly, I will tell you how many metals which oxidize alcohols, and this alcohol oxidation leads to reduction of the metal. That's also one factor that we have already looked at. And this is very similar to the beta hydrogen elimination that we have been talking about. So this is one possible pathway. Multiple ways to oxidize the alcohol is there. Alcohol is the reducing agent and the metal is being reduced. So one simple way by which you can do that is by abstracting the beta hydrogen which is present on the alcohol onto the metal, and the alcohol now becomes a ketone or an aldehyde. And subsequently you can of course form the hydride complex, or you can eliminate HCl from there, resulting in you can go back and forth in this step in the case of iridium, because you're basically just protonating the species. Okay, what I have in the lower half of the slide. So this can happen simultaneously during the chloride dissociation. So that's a possibility, but this is only one way in which you can do the reaction. The other way is to the second way is, just a second, I have, yeah. The second way is to remove the hydrogen and chlorine simultaneously, by HCl elimination, and that can be promoted by a base. This can be promoted by a base, which that means the base is removing the proton from the alcohol, and chloride is just a counter ion for this whole process. So that's a possibility also. Okay, so there are multiple ways to do this reaction. What Mervin-Ponndorf-Verley reaction does is a hydride transfer directly from the alcohol to the next ketone. Here we are transferring it to the chloride. In Mervin-Ponndorf-Verley reaction, you are transferring it to the ketone. So, let me now come to the case where you have hydrogenation, in which one of the hydrogens is coming from the ligand itself, and this is a case where this is a reverse of the previous reaction that we have been talking about. A ketone is reduced to an alcohol, and this reduction is happening on a ruthenium center. One hydrogen comes into this carbon, and one hydrogen is coming into the oxygen. The hydrogen that is coming into the oxygen is in fact coming from the hydrogen on the nitrogen or on the ligand. So ligand is giving one hydrogen, the metal is giving one hydrogen. So this kind of a hydrogenation, this catalyst gets converted to RuH, NH. This is the catalyst that is generated in situ. Okay, and now I can have CO, one hydrogen transferred here, another hydrogen transferred here. resulting in the formation of the product. Product, of course, is an alcohol, and with ruthenium N bond. This had two hydrogens to start with. Now it will have only one hydrogen, and TS with two groups. This is Naiori's catalyst, and Naiori's catalyst is a chiral catalyst. So the product, in fact, can be a chiral alcohol in this whole process. Okay, so this is TS, a tosylate. So this not only generates a chiral alcohol, product alcohol can be chiral. If I have RCHOH, it will be a chiral species. And this is done very efficiently. So transfer hydrogenation can be, this is called transfer hydrogenation because we have not used dihydrogen, but we have transferred it from another molecule. I will add a supplement a little later. But I want to tell you that I have added a small video to supplement yesterday's lecture on carbon monoxide insertion, because I want to have one or two slots free for discussion of catalytic reactions, because there are so many reactions that can be discussed. I can keep giving lectures, but it doesn't help if you do not go back and read extra stuff, extra material from books or from journals. You need to spend some time and read. I think that is something that you have to work on independently. I found that I had made a mistake in the key, and none of you have complained. I just started correcting your papers, and I find that most of you have not explored the website to answer the first question. And so it is not a very meaningful answer that you have given. Since the whole idea of my spending time and getting the website ready was to help you to understand the things better and also to do better in your future work. So I was a bit disappointed when I started seeing the papers. Many of you have not answered it fully, and of course, making mistakes is okay, but not making an effort is not excusable. So please spend some time, listen to the two supplements that I have added. I have added two videos I want you to go through, because they are alternate. They are additional and alternate mechanisms that I have provided. Questions, if you have it. Okay, so if there are no, yeah.
Sir, in Wilkinson catalyst, if you use cobalt instead of rhodium, then the reaction will happen or not?
No, if that was the case, then they would have used cobalt, because cobalt is 1,000 times cheaper than rhodium. In fact, even if you replace it with iridium, it doesn't work. That is what the book says. So that's why I said that unlike organic chemistry, where you can have so much of replacement of one group by another group, the transition metal catalysts are not, you cannot use the periodic table to simply transfer one metal to another metal and expect the same reactivity. And even here, like I said, PPH3 to P83, the reaction stops. So there is a lot of balance that is needed in the catalytic cycle. Many of these reactions are reversible. So when you have a reversible reaction, if you make one of the steps very thermodynamically favorable, you will end up stopping the catalyst. Then you have what is called catalyst poisoning. Catalytic cycle is not favored. So
Okay. And sir,
yeah.
sir, why it is called homogeneous catalyst? Because hydrogen is gas.
Yeah, good question. That is because it is the hydrogen that is dissolved in the solution in the solvent that is reacting. It's not a surface reaction.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
It's a good observation because it's connected to the solubility of the hydrogen in the different solvents. So solvents can make an effect in the rate of reaction.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
So regarding the purification of homogeneous catalyst, compared to heterogeneous catalysis, isn't it very difficult to purify them and get out the product?
In general, yes, but the selectivity is significantly greater in homogeneous catalysts compared to heterogeneous catalysts. So the extra effort that you have to spend in separating uh, is paid for. So, for example, if you get 50% of an impurity and 50% of the product, then uh, it's even if you can easily separate it, it doesn't help. That's a quick and
Yes, sir. So
ready answer.
regarding the okay. Regarding the heterogeneous catalysis with palladium, so for hydrogenation, so their selectivity may not be good, but impure. I mean, there aren't any many byproducts like you can get when you hydrogenate an alkene, right? So for such small reactions where you have to do them in bulk, like compared to heterogeneous catalysis, homogeneous catalysis, heterogeneous catalysts are much more advantageous, right? When you do want to do them in industrial scale.
Yeah, the problem, the example that I gave you, for example, there are for you, there are multiple double bonds. So the selectivity for the homogeneous is still greater. That's the point. So you can control it. I gave you two simple examples, but by adjusting the ligands, you can adjust the reactivity of the homogeneous catalyst as well. So you do have fine control as opposed to heterogeneous catalysts, where very often the active site is not known. In fact, it's only recently that people have started looking at nanoparticles phase specific reactions of nanoparticles and so on under high vacuum conditions. And even then, you cannot be absolutely sure that the active site that you're looking at and the active site that is really carrying out the reaction are the same. So it's a very complicated, catalysis is a very difficult problem to solve. Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop here. We'll continue next week. I have uploaded a game, details of a game. I would like you to test it out. Sometimes the order of the cards might make a difference. So if you think that you have solved the problem, then you can send a snapshot of the game that you think you have solved, and send it to me. But otherwise, the game is automatically meant to stop when you have completed the catalytic cycle. Okay,